Hey everyone, and welcome to OiC's Summer with Psalms. My name is Maicon Steuernagel. I'm the pastor at OiC International Church. And on this reflection, I continue our tradition of spending our summer Sundays with the Psalms. And this year we're going to do our best to post as many of these reflections online as we manage. So just be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on Instagram if you want to keep updated on them in this way. So as we read the Psalms, which are this collection of songs, poetry, prayers that we have in our Bibles, one of the things that we do is to ask ourselves if we have a place in these songs and prayers, if we may speak them out and utter them, or if they just feel altogether improper in our lips. And I say that because some of the Psalms are easier to pray, to sing, to say. Other Psalms we may find difficult. Some of them because they seem to speak of an experience or a feeling that we just don't share. Others because they seem to speak to God in a language, in a manner of speaking that we wouldn't usually use or feel comfortable using. Take, for example, the Psalms that ask for vengeance in very graphic terms. And that's not exactly the kind of language that I'm comfortable with in my own lips. But the Psalm I want to read for you today, it may feel improper for very different reasons. My heart is not proud, Lord. My eyes are not haughty. I do not concern myself with great matters or things too wonderful for me. But I have calmed and quieted myself. I am like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child, I am content. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, both now and forevermore. This is Psalm 131, and it only has 3 verses. Yeah, I can easily find myself struggling with it. And this time, it's not the language that seems inappropriate to us. It's just this calmness, this state of rest that the psalmist describes, that honestly, it seems unreal. It seems all too elusive. Do we even know such a rest? Could we achieve something like that? And then I read this psalm in this year, right? In 2020, the year of the pandemic, and I can't help but think that this can only be inappropriate for what we may very well call the year of anxiety and insecurity and fear. It seems even more ironic to read all of this at the doors of July. This is the last Sunday of June, and the month of summer vacations is upon us. And think about it. This is how July is supposed to work, right? This is the month in which everybody wants rest, in which rest has become actually sort of a commodity, a market product. Right? So our eyes are flooded with images of white sandy beaches with cold coconut water, and we should travel, we should buy the new grill for our balcony, you should rest, and this is how you do it. Right? And we're sold on how to do it. And then this year, the vacation business was actually turned up on its head, and we're all under this new weird kind of pressure and find ourselves wondering and ask each other, so how are you going to do vacation this year when you can't travel, when you can't do things as usual? And I'm sure we wish well. But reading Psalm 131 gets me thinking that we all strive for and wish for each other is, and this thing that we feel like we're being robbed of this holiday season, it's just really short-term relief, right? It's something that may relax our muscles and slow our heart rate a bit, and there's nothing wrong with that. I want one, but it will not quiet and calm our soul. It doesn't seem like the content of this psalm is something we could stick into a travel agency's commercial, because the psalmist seems to be speaking of something altogether different. Something not only different, but something deeper, in a way more real. And I wonder if both our workaholic busyness of the rest of the year and our eager search for that perfect vacation aren't often just ways of keeping ourselves occupied. either with work or with leisure, but keeping ourselves busy so that we won't have to deal with whatever is underneath the surface. Certainly one of the challenges of lockdown is forcing us to spend way more time with ourselves, and I'm saying with ourselves, not for ourselves, than we would usually care for. In verse 2, the psalmist says, I have calmed and quieted my soul. The term soul here, nephesh, it's similar to the concept of heart in verse 1, and they are expressions of wholeness in Hebrew. While we often read them to sort of split ourselves into departments and try to deal with our pieces separately, so like soul, body, the Psalm's language actually refuses to do that. And the soul it's never disembodied. Neither is the body treated apart from the soul. The heart is, in that way, it's a blood pump and an emotions hub at the same time. And in that sense, the translation that I just read here, I think it's a good one. It says, I have calmed and quieted myself. But we really need to bear in mind that this self is the whole self. So again, the psalmist seems to be speaking of something else than just getting a good massage that will relax my muscles, or taking a beautiful vacation that will take my mind off my troubles back home. At the end of verse 2, the psalmist says, like a weaned child, I am content. And weaned here can refer both to a child who has stopped breastfeeding, which is how we usually use it nowadays, but it can also refer to a child who has just been fed. And I think that's the case in the psalm here. And if you have ever seen a young baby before and after being fed, you know what a powerful image this is. You know how the baby goes from despair because he needs something right now to being completely at rest and calm in the arms of the mother because he's been fed, because she's been fed. But I would like to call attention to the word content here, because it reminds me of another person that used the same term and seemed to have understood what this psalm is all about. And I am thinking about the Apostle Paul. Now, at the face of it, Paul seems like really the wrong guy to speak about this. Persecuted, pretty much a workaholic, and definitely not the well-off worker enjoying his retirement or a long weekend, right? Paul would seem almost restless from his biography. But when writing a letter to the Philippians, Paul says this, I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. This seems like a very different sort of narrative from what we are told and sold every day in our culture. We are taught to associate contentment with plenty, with lack of need, with peace and prosperity, right? Yet Paul is saying that he was able to be content in whichever situation. And this doesn't only sound odd, it sounds almost offensive to most of us. Why would you even be content when you are being persecuted? Why would you be content when you are in jail? Why would you be content when you are hungry? Why would you be content in 2020? To understand this, I think we really need to remember Paul's story, because this is not about what Paul achieved. This is about what Paul surrendered. So the story of Paul is that he was a very zealous Jew who was completely convinced that the Christians were a sect that were derailing Judaism, that were derailing the true faith, and therefore he went at them hard. as hard as he could. He was going after Christians, finding ways of getting them into jail, bearing witness to them being killed, as in the case of Stephen, who was the first known martyr in the Bible, and really going for them. And the language that is used of Paul at this stage is a language of someone going almost with an aggressivity in that. But then on his road to Damascus one day, on this mission, so on his way to try and get the Christians that he would find in Damascus arrested, he has this meeting with Christ on the road. And he's met by this shining light that throws him off into the ground, and he hears this voice saying, "Why are you persecuting me?" And he says, Who is this, Lord? And the voice answers, "It is Jesus whom you are persecuting." And then Paul is transformed by this experience. He is actually blinded, literally blinded by this experience. And when he gets up, he needs to be carried by his hand into the city. But when he comes into the city, he is met by a follower of Jesus called Ananias, whom Jesus said, "Ask to go meet Paul." And Ananias comes and he heals him of his blindness, and he welcomes him as a brother. And this changes things completely. This is the background, and this is, I think, the source of Paul's contentment in a way. Because singing Psalm 131 in the context of Paul's story means having also sung Psalm 130. "If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, so that we can with reverence serve you." When Paul saw Christ before him, and the contrast of the light of Jesus' presence and the darkness of Paul's own story, Paul knew. He knew that the waiting was over. He knew that the morning had come, and he knew that there was unfailing love and full redemption. When he got up from the floor, grasping for someone to guide him towards the town, he knew that he could only stand because the Lord chose not to keep a record of his sins and not to treat him as he would have treated others. Paul knew that he had nothing to bargain with Christ. He had despised him, he had persecuted his followers, he had declared holy war on the Holy One of God, and he had lost, utterly lost. But then again, for that very reason, he had won. He had won because he had been won over by a God of mercy in whom he found forgiveness. In Jesus, in grace, he found that he was content, that he didn't need anything else, just like the psalmist. And in that sense, Jesus welcomes Paul into this psalm, into the possibility of living and singing this psalm. And so also he gives us a place in it. When we read verse 1, we recognize and surrender from our attempts to play God. "My heart is not proud, Lord. My eyes are not haughty. I do not concern myself with great matters or things too wonderful for me." When we read verse 2, we recognize grace in Jesus, and that grace is enough, is all we need. "But I have calmed and quieted myself. I am like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child, I am content." The rest of the child has to do with what it receives from the mother, not with the quietness of the circumstances around that, but with the milk that he craves and that she gives. And so with verse 3, we find that this is not a psalm about finding the sort of rest where there is no struggle or adversity. This is not about having a quiet day with no troubles or finding a perfect beach with no waves. No, this is a psalm about hope. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, both now and forevermore. About hope in the middle of real life, about proper placement of hope. There is rest in the Lord because He meets our brokenness with grace and offers us real hope. And God is this mother giving us the very thing that we need for the real need of our souls, and gives us this milk, and her milk is perfect and is enough to make us content to be in the presence of God, of this mother with all her goodness. And so in Jesus, and in this space of grace in His arms, recognizing her goodness, we can say this psalm together. I have calmed and quieted myself. I am like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child, I am content. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn His face towards you and give you peace and give you hope. Go in peace and serve the Lord joyfully.